It's waxing lyrical, baby.
Hello, Waxers, and welcome to Waxing Lyrical with Mainz and Dutts. I'm your host, Mainz, and my colleague, a man fighting, scratching, and clawing to stay off injured reserve for the playoffs is Mr. Neil Dutton. How are we, Neil?
The idea that I would put off an abdominal injury surgery to play a game where I'm going likely to get the crap kicked out of said abdominal area. These people, seriously, these are modern day gladiators as they throw themselves recklessly into battle 70 times a game for our entertainment.
As a man who's known you for 20 years, and you've known me, obviously, for the same amount of time, we've hurt knees, sore feet, broken arms, and vowed never to play sport ever again. As you said, Lane Johnson tore an abdominal muscle and is just going to give it a rest for a week or two and should be fine for the playoffs. I don't want to make light of the Tua Tagovailoa situation, but he was concussed and felt like he was okay to play, or felt that he was in a situation where he could play, and he did. And I just find that mind-blowing that that's how they are incorrectly in some situations, I think, put in the league where they believe that they should just play through any type of pain or situation imaginable, when actually that is far from the case for the rest of the world.
The weird thing is, as well, it's a self-defeating prophecy because they are taught, obviously, this to be mega tough, macho, stay out there wherever you can. But also they buy into the mentality of, well, you don't lose your place if you're injured. So why stay out there then if you're hurt?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. But I mean, these are elite athletes, so we leave it to them. This week we are in basically the final stretches of fantasy leagues across the NFL. Finals all over the place this week. Some of us in this group in a massive dynasty final, upsetting all the odds against a team which, let's not be honest, basically after reaching the semi-finals, cheated in a way to try and win that matchup and was thwarted by good. For those who are unaware, I'm in a final. Beat someone who traded for Travis Kelce after the regular season because we hadn't written in stone that you couldn't trade post a certain time. Every loophole in the book smashed. If I win this league, the first order of business will be to remove that horrendous rule from our books forevermore.
I don't do playoffs in Dynasty, so I don't know what you're talking about.
No, we will also talk news on the Broncos, on Derek Carr, and on JJ Watt.
By the way,
do you just some fantasy predictions bound to go wrong?
Do you remember when the AFC West was an arms race?
Yeah,
and now it looks like a car boot sale.
It was about a week and a half ago when we did the podcast, basically fully on it. Go us! What a disaster. To be fair, there's people who listen to other podcasts which have got much more listenership who said exactly the same thing. So at least we're not stupid on our own. Everybody else was the same.
I mean, there's a phrase, that someone is loaded for bear. That you're tooling up, so you go loaded for bear. Unfortunately, the AFC West looks like it went tooled up, loaded for Care Bears.
See what you did there. One for the kids. Do the kids even know what Care Bears are anymore? Who knows?
Unless they're on Roblox, I don't think they care.
No. Without further ado, let's get on with the show and get on with the Mainz event.
Time now for the main event.
Let's get straight on with it, Neil. There, AFC West, and start with the shocking, I tell you, news that the Denver Broncos fired Nathaniel Hackett in the least surprising move in NFL history. First question, really, where did this go wrong?
It went wrong when they hired Aaron Rodgers offensive coordinator and then didn't trade for Aaron Rodgers. So straight away they're on an organisational back foot because whatever they did from that point on was going to be plan B. You can set it out whatever way you want. All the draft picks you gave away, all the contract dollars you threw at Russell Wilson, he was not the first choice. So that was, the big mistake. I wouldn't say it was doomed to failure from that point. But what has happened is, when you have a first-time head coach, I think it's almost become perceived wisdom that you'd like them to have an experienced, doesn't have to be an assistant, but certainly one of the coordinators should be a bit more experienced than the head coach. Been round the block a bit. Nate Hackett didn't put into place any such arrangement. So they were pretty much, it was a team of kids, for want of a word, learning on the job on a franchise that has just gone all in to get a franchise quarterback, and you can't be learning on the job. You've got to hit the ground running, and they didn't. I don't think anyone expected Russell Wilson to be as bad as he has been, so that obviously hasn't helped. But the damage that trade has done, allied to the position they are in now, has set this franchise back years. Because even if they do what many would deem unthinkable, and just decide, look, we'll designate them post June 1 and cut them because no one's trading them. Well, okay, that's great. You don't have the draft picks to bolster this roster. So the dangerous thing is, for me, is there's only 32 NFL teams. We know this. We've said this in the past. And these jobs don't come. 4 or 5 every year. So they're not that common. But I wonder or worry that there might be, this year's hot offensive star, Ben Johnson at Detroit or whoever, might actually be bold enough, if they're offered this job or, interview for it, to say, I can't fix him. And, if he's going to be around based on the tape, based on what I've seen, I can't work with that. And you've shown that you're not afraid to fire one and done coaches. So if I come here and I wed myself to Russell Wilson and it goes wrong or continues to go wrong, I'm done. I'm not going to get another head coaching job. I might not get another offensive coordinator gig. So I worry that this gig, it's the Denver Broncos. They are one of the premier teams of my time watching. They've had some great players. But I wonder and worry that job has now become toxic.
I do look and think, so what you're trying to explain to me is, what we need to do is, we need to put ourselves in a situation where the quarterback throws less, we run more, and we play good defense. You mean the situation Russell Wilson was in before we gave him, $200 million? I think that, I assume that when you trade for him, as part of the trade, you'd agreed that you have to give him a contract. And there was a delay in the contract because there was a delay in ownership changeover, if we remember. But the issue may not be the trade. The issue is the contract. Because you would have liked to have thought that you could play him this year and then give him a contract. So what they've done is lock themselves in really for, I think, 2 years of him being on the roster and 3 years of him taking up a massive percentage of the salary cap, when they could have, in theory, had all this year and just binned him off. And okay, you lose the draft picks, understand that, but at least you're not tied to him in a financial sense. When I've done the touchdown review, although it's not out yet, but when will people realize that a head coach is not just the next job you do after being a coordinator? It is a very, very different job. Now, some teams do have head coaches who call plays on either offense or defense, but being a head coach is very different from being a coordinator. Nathaniel Hackett was a coordinator who didn't call plays. He was a guy who helped on offense and seemed to get on reasonably well with Aaron Rodgers. As you quite rightly pointed out, it looks like they believed that they were going to get Aaron Rodgers, not Russell Wilson. Aaron decided to stay, and then it was panic, we have to do something. Nathaniel Hackett looks like he's been over his head in this position since week 1, really. If you're the Denver Broncos, you usually find the teams hiring completely opposite directions. So I would assume they would go for someone like Dan Quinn, because you have a defensive coach, someone who has been a head coach before, so understands that role. I could not imagine them. But then you're like, well, what does that mean for Russell Wilson? Well, I don't know. But there'll be a load of offensive coordinators who say, oh, I could fix Russell Wilson. Well, guess what? Only he can. Because when he wasn't fixed, or when people used to slag the team off that he used to play for, they scored 27 points a season. Darrell Bevel, Schottenheimer, all these guys, we slagged them off, Neil, all the time. And they got 24 to 27 points a game and won 10, 11 games a season. I think now, hindsight should be like, they did a great job because they hid the fact that he's an absolute loon. Russell Wilson was a weirdo in Seattle, or we assumed was a weirdo. He seems toxic now. So nothing's changed in Russell Wilson. He's still Russell Wilson. It's just the environment that he's in has allowed him to become what he got sacked multiple times on Christmas Day. Christmas Day, and no one picked him up. 0 people picked him up. Like, whether you like his bravado or not, look at this. Look at Baker Mayfield. People don't like him, you think, but when he's in a locker room, people seem to get on okay with him. But
I think
people despise Russell Wilson.
There's an excellent piece in the Athletic, and also Jeff Schwartz tweeted about this. It's the fact that professional players who have not been brought up with this man, he's been airlifted into this situation on a veteran roster. They'll see through you if you're not genuine. And this, sitting on the bench, covering his mouth with a football when they're down 37-14, in a position that he put them in, by the way, with 2 terrible interceptions. It's as Jeff Schwartz says, you're more interested in how you look on the camera than in getting a message across. Jeff Schwartz said he'd have been more comfortable to see literally Wilson have to be restrained from shouting back at his offensive lineman as they shout at him, rather than no one can see what play we're calling. Your plays are shit. No one cares. You may as well mail the opposition your offensive players because you can't execute them. Your players, as the team is done with you on the field. And like it or not, this is the roster that you're going to have next season because of all the draft picks. So I don't like saying that Russell Wilson is a coach killer, although he's got a couple of offensive coordinators fired and a head coach because of his poor play. He is the major stumbling block. Last year, he may have been this is the attractive thing about the job. Now it's one of the main reasons. As I say, I can see some people having second thoughts about taking it.
What lessons should other teams learn from what's happened with the Broncos?
If you are inquiring about a team's all-time franchise leader in wins, yards, touchdown passes, and every other statistical category you care to think of, and that team says, we're listening, hang the phone up. Because it's that, going to a bar, every time you see a pretty girl, someone's already bored with her shit. If you ring up, if someone was to ring up and say to the Eagles next year, we'll give you 3 first-round picks for Jalen Hurts, and Howie goes, not really that interested. Don't carry on the conversation, because he'll screw you. We know what Harry Roseman does. But if it's there, hey, we're thinking about Jalen Hurts. Hello, Howie. Don't do it. These quarterbacks, the movement at the quarterback position is an unprecedented level. Don't get sucked in. It's much better to get a bridge and draft your own, or at least try and do that. Because how many, seriously, of these trades, how many have worked? Drew Brees, that was free agency, so it wasn't a trade. Peyton Manning, free agency.
Don't
work.
Don't ever forget, you are hiring a CEO.
Yeah.
Now, do you want that CEO to be good at one side of the ball, preferably offense? Probably. Do you think? Do you see Sean McVay, Carl Shanahan, Mike McDaniel, and think, I want one of them? Yeah, probably. It makes sense. Make sure you pick the right one. Because if you don't, you end up with Nathaniel Hackett. Maybe take more than 2 interviews. Let's be honest. Nathaniel Hackett had multiple interviews with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So whatever he was selling, people were wanting to buy. And now the Jaguars have got Doug Peterson and are going to make the playoffs. And, Nathaniel Hackett's looking for a new job. Let's stay in the AFC West, Neil. News yesterday. Yesterday was the Derek Carr has been benched for Jarrett Stidham. I guess my first question is, what do you think the reason is?
The reason is a 46-year-old quarterback with long-standing ties to the current Raiders head coach, who's not happy with the team he's at the moment and is eyeing one more shot at winning it all.
But yes, so we're talking Tom Brady for those who are for the uninitiated. But they're not getting Tom Brady for week 17. So is this a protection of trade value for Derek Carr? Or because they could just cut him, right? So I don't even think he will be traded. So is it an assumption that they just don't want him to be injured in the final 2 weeks of the season?
As Jason Fitzgerald at Jason_OTC, friend of the pod, tweeted yesterday, Carr has a no trade clause. So I'll read the tweet. He has a no trade. Basically, they would need to work with him over the next month or so to give him a list of teams he would be willing to be traded to, if any. They would then have to get one of those teams to agree to trade for him, even though he can't be traded until March. Carr's contract becomes fully guaranteed 3 days after the Super Bowl. So his 2023 salary, which I believe is $32 million, becomes fully guaranteed 3 days after the Super Bowl. The Raiders are not going to be paying that.
No.
I'm sure they would like some assets for him. But ultimately, if it comes down to it, they can cut him. That then opens up the cap space to sign Tom Brady. Derek Carr has not played well this season. Just these stats for this season, and I know stats and context, this is not a good team. They were 6-9. They should be much more because of how many leads they let slip in the second half of games. But his completion percentage is 60.8. That is his lowest since his rookie season. The last 3 seasons, his completion percentage is 68.4, 67.3, 70.4. He has 24 touchdowns to 14 interceptions. He leads the league with 14 interceptions, and it was the same number he threw last year. Last year, he threw them at a 2.2% rate. This year, it's 2.8, which is a career high. His yards per attempt is 7. That's the lowest it's been since 2017. His adjusted yards per attempt is 6.7, which is, again, lowest since 2017. His QBR is 56.2, which is his lowest. Well, no, actually, it's an improvement. His QBR last year was 52.4. He's taken 27 sacks at a 5.1% rate, which is in line with his career rate. He has not been great. A lot of people are thinking now he's got Devontae Adams, we're going to see a career season from Derek Carr. Well, no, we're not, because it's going to be the first time since 2017 that he's not going to get to 4,000 passing yards. He's on 3,522, and obviously he's not going to get the other 478 that he needs.
Why has he not been as good this year then? Because in theory, based on weapons, it's probably the most weapons he's ever had as a quarterback.
It's a roster full of holes, and we've seen how many leads did they lose? Well, if your team is ahead that much and you don't play both sides of the ball, which, spoiler alert, none of these lads do anymore, that comes down to coaching. So their coach has lost them a lot of games in the second half. I mean, what was the stat? In the 58 years before this season, they'd blown 3 17-point leads. This season, they've blown 4. That's on the coach. So clearly, we have a situation where you thought that Derek Carr was going to fall out massively with his last head coach. Where it turns out it's a head coach who, in his second go-round as a head coach, after the first one, where he came in and alienated the franchise quarterback and traded him away for buttons to get his guys in, seems to be doing it again.
Yeah. I'm the problem, it's me. Which team should be in the running for Derek Carr?
The Jets. They have a roster that is primed to be very good. They've got 3 good young wide receivers. They've got some other good complementary pieces. They've got decent tight ends. When he returns, they will have a good running back. They've got a very young, talented defense. They just need a quarterback to not kill them and maybe make the odd play. I think you could argue that Derek Carr would be, on his game, Derek Carr would be an upgrade on Mike White. So he's certainly in contention. If he's a veteran quarterback and available for trade, then obviously the Colts are going to be interested. They're the obvious ones. I mean,
they lack talent at all levels of the field, though.
They do. But, they're the 2 that most obvious ones that leap out at me. I can't think. There's Washington as well, of course.
I think the Jets and Washington are the most logical landing spots off the top. Most logical in terms of where he would go, but based on what you've just described from Jason in terms of how that would need to happen, the Jets situation seems a lot more likely than the Washington situation in terms of that trading situation. They are both playoff 10, 11 win teams with a capable quarterback, I think is the best way to describe it. Neither of them have mediocre at best quarterbacks right now, and are 8, 9 win teams. There's games they've lost that they would win, kind of idea. So yeah, it makes sense. Can he succeed somewhere else? Do we expect an improvement from Carr? Do we think this is a McDaniel situation rather than the Carr one?
I think so. The body of work suggests that Derek Carr is a Kirk Cousins style quarterback. He's never going to be the reason you win, but on his day, he's probably not going to be the reason why you might lose. He's, to quote Brandon Lee Gowton, he's not the worst quarterback in the league, but he's probably the worst type of quarterback to have, because you'll always feel like you can do better, but you don't want to do worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Final story, Neil. JJ Watt retires. Share some thoughts on what you remember of JJ Watt, especially in his peak.
Well, he was dominant from a position that over the years we didn't really expect or see much dominance from. He was putting up edge defender numbers from a 3-4 defensive end. He wasn't a pass rusher. He was a run stuffer. And he was, an athletic freak. He probably could have been, I think he probably could have been a Pro Bowl tight end, for what he was able to do. He's one of the few defensive players in the last, certainly 20 years, I've been watching, who has had a season that you could say, look, we don't just have to give the MVP to an offensive player, look at what he's done. His 2014 season was, damn near historic. He was a character as well. He wasn't, I'm not going to say he was never dull, should we say. Just looking here, 2014, he had 20.5 sacks. That was his second 20.5 sack season of his career. He had 29 tackles for loss. That led the NFL. He had 5 fumble recoveries. And he had an 80-yard interception for a touchdown.
He also caught 3 offensive touchdowns in 2014.
Yeah.
And had an interception.
Yeah. So he was, Associated Press, he was MVP. I think he was a runner-up for that. He was the Defensive Player of the Year. He was an All-Pro, and he made it to the Pro Bowl. it wasn't his last great season, but I mean, the season after that, he led the league with 17.5 sacks, 29 TFLs again. But then after that, the injuries started to mount up. 3 games in 2016, 5 in 2017, full season in 2018 with 16 sacks, but then 8, 16, 7, and now 14. Although he has got 9.5 sacks this year, which is most since 2018. He was a force for good on the Texans, on and off the field. And probably, had his finger on the pulse in the locker room when things started to disintegrate at higher levels. So he was, I'm not to say he's a one-off because, I dare say people will talk about this type of player the next time we see him. But he was one of a kind. And, the league will be a poorer place without.
Neil talked about tackles for loss there. The leader in single season tackles for loss is J.J. Watt with 39. Joint second with 29 tackles for loss is J.J. Watt twice. That's 2012 he had 39, 2014 he had 29, and 2015 he had 29. He also had when did he have the other one? He also had 22 in 2013. That adds up to 119 tackles for loss in a 4-year stretch, which averages at around 29.75. The best single season by anybody else in NFL history is Chandler Jones at 28. So, in a 4-year span, the average tackle for loss by J.J. Watt was better than anybody else has ever done. On this list, Von Miller, DeMarcus Ware, Aaron Donald, Michael Strahan, Justin Houston, Khalil Mack, Robert Quinn, T.J. Watt. J.J. Watt was a dominant player that changed the field. As Neil said, 2014, 29 tackles for loss, 20.5 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 5 fumble recoveries, 1 interception, and effing 3 offensive touchdowns. He also raised somewhere in the million of $60 million for people affected by the hurricane in Houston in, I think that was 2019. He was forced out of Houston mainly because they had a load of weirdos in charge. And they tried to spread a narrative that actually it was J.J. Watt who was a weirdo who was only in it for himself and he always took his helmet off and whatever. Went to Arizona. I haven't heard anything like that in Arizona. And guess what? Everyone in Houston's been fired because they're all bad weirdos. J.J. Watt, not TJ, J.J. Watt is a first ballot Hall of Famer and one of the most dominant players of the 21st century.
He caught 6 passes in his NFL career, including the playoffs, on offense and defense, and all 6 of them went for touchdowns.
That's a good ratio, Neil. That's a good ratio. We wish him all the best. And it's always nice to see a player decide to call his shot and say, I'm going to retire now, as very regularly in the NFL, you are retired by the NFL, not the other way around. That's it for the news. Let's get on with the fancy portion. It's championship week. Let's give you a hand with some fancy darlings.
Hello, darling.
Last week, Neil picked Brock Purdy to light up the Washington Commanders. Didn't quite light them up. He was QB 13, 15.96 points. That's a loss. Neil did pick the Chargers defense. They were defense number 2. 20 points, 3 interceptions and 7 sacks. That's a win for those paying attention. Neil is 12-17 overall, 1-1 last week. This week, Neil, help people win their fancy championship. Get them on that waiver wire. Who's your fancy darling? First fancy darling, please.
First fancy darling is someone who is very happy that Mike White is back at quarterback for the Jets. That's Tyler Conklin. In games that Zach Wilson has not played this season, Conklin averages 5 receptions and 40 receiving yards per game. The Jets are playing in the Geno Smith Bowl this week against the Seattle Seahawks. Only the Titans and the Cardinals have allowed more receiving yards to tight ends than the Seahawks this season. So if you need a tight end streamer this week, and God knows you probably do, I'd go with Tyler Conklin.
Number 2, Neil.
Number 2, you need a defense to get you over the line this week. I'm going with the Detroit Lions. Before last week's debacle, which it was, let's be honest.
It was.
The Lions had a streak of 6 games with multiple quarterback sacks and had 2 or more in 8 of their previous 9 games. They are a good shout this week because they are playing the salve for all your woes when you play. If you need to go against a team with a defense, the Chicago Bears. The Bears are tied with the 5th most lost turnovers this season and are one of only 4 teams to have absorbed 50 or more sacks. So if you want a defense this week, maybe you go with the Chargers again. They're playing the Rams. But Baker Mayfield, can he do it again? I don't know. But if you really need one, the Detroit Lions, they will be out there, I assure you. Plug them in.
Let's get on with Fancy Loser. Neil misunderstood the assignment last week and picked Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott was QB1, not 100. 27.98 points. It looked so good on his first play through it for a pick 6. However, subsequent to that, he was 27 of 35 for 347 yards and 3 touchdowns in what was a pretty spectacular game, if I do say so myself, on Christmas
Jonathan
Eve.
Gannon, if any team wants to hire him as the defensive coordinator, I'll drive him to the interview. But I'm leaving him there. Against good quarterbacks, my God, Gannon does not have a clue.
And Dak Prescott was good last week.
He was.
Neil, who's your fancy loser this week?
Fancy loser this week is Marquise Brown. There are a few reasons for this. He doesn't have his quarterback. Kyler Murray is not playing. In games that Kyler Murray has played this season, Marquise Brown averages 10.3 targets, 7 receptions, and 76 receiving yards, and averages 17.2 PPR points. That's a good wide receiver too. In most leagues, we know historically I've never been the biggest fan of Marquise Brown, but I'm not turning my nose up at 17.2 fancy points. In games that Kyler Murray has not played this year, he averages 3.7 receptions for less than 40 receiving yards and 7.4 PPR points per game. Now, they're playing the Atlanta Falcons, who, that looks like it's a good matchup because, they're terrible. But over the last 4 weeks, the leading wide receiver against the Falcons. The most notable wide receiver performances against the Falcons in the last 4 weeks, Rashid Shaheed, 3 for 95 and a touchdown. That's it. The most receptions, Deontay Johnson, 5 for 60. They are clamping down on wide receivers, whether that's because teams just like to run on them. Could be it. But, they're averaging 17.9 PPR points to wide receivers as a whole over the last 4 games. So, Marquise Brown, I just don't think the shot's on, especially not in Championship week. Don't think it's worth the risk.
Great stuff, Neil. Let's get on with fancy predictions. Bound to go wrong. Last week, I said Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle were combined for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns. It was all looking good in the first half. Obviously, we know what happened with Tua subsequently, and it didn't quite go as well. Waddle was 5 catches for 143 yards and a touchdown. Hill was 4 catches for 103 yards and no touchdowns. So 246 and 1 score. So 100 yards short and 2 touchdowns. That's a loss. Neil said that in the Browns and Saints games, there wouldn't be a single player with double digits. Not quite true. Amari Cooper, Deshaun Watson and Nick Chubb all got above 10, but none got above 15. Alvin Kamara got 19 for the Saints and Taysom Hill got 11, so it's a loss. Neil, who's your fancy prediction bound to go wrong this week?
Fancy prediction this week. I've been hunting them, and they keep avoiding me, but not this week. This week, your RB1 with 25 or more PPR points will be Travis Etienne against the Houston Texans.
as a man who owns Travis Etienne, this makes me very happy. I'm going on the RB train as well. We just talked about Falcons v Cards. I don't know if anybody's aware, but quarterbacks need not apply in the Atlanta Falcons offense against the rubbish Cards. I'm going to Tyler Algier is a top 3 running back in the home game against the Cards. I also think he will get 25 plus points. Go us, Neil. Go us. Running back heavy, even though they don't matter, and all that jazz. Neil, that is it for this week in the strange window of time between Christmas and New Year. Before we speak to everyone again in 2023, where can people catch you?
Find me on Twitter at @ndutton13. Read my stuff, Numberfire, Rotoviz, Player Profiler, and for the last time this season, the matchups scouting report for 4for Football, and get the latest edition of Gridiron Magazine for my retelling of my day in Munich.
Fantastic stuff. I'm at Mainz7. Come by me at waxing_lyrical. Touchdown review, not out yet. Still got to do one of the interviews, but that will be out around the same time as this. Listen to both, like both, rate both. Send it to your friends, your aunties, your uncles, anybody you wish. They'll all love it, I promise. This is the last show 2022. We've enjoyed it. Hope you have. We will see you in 2023 when the fantasy season will be over, but the NFL playoffs will be upon us and we'll have a lot to talk about. Until then, these top guys are out.